we are here. The context of our conversation today is about individual major gifts. So more specifically, we're going to talk about how you can adapt to our current environment and raise more major gifts for your mission, even though face-to-face meetings are off the table for most right now. All right, so I designed this masterclass just for you if you're someone who's feeling a little bit uncertain about how to proceed with major donors right now that face-to-face meetings are off the table. If your organization is scrambling to replace lost revenues as well, this is the right place for you. If you feel like you have a lot fewer fundraising options, you're not alone there. So, and finally, if you're somebody who's really ready to take action to land more big donations for your mission, you have come to the right place. So I hope you notice the value of the ideas that I'm sharing today. I am going to be moving very, very quickly. I've packed a lot in. So I want to suggest have a pen and paper ready so you can jot down your ideas so you don't miss a thing. So with that, let's get started. And hello to folks who are just joining us. And I want to start off by saying, this is not just another webinar. So I've designed this, I've made sure that it's not theory. This is practical content you can put to use right away. I want you to take something away from today and actually be able to actively apply it right now, immediately to your major gift work. Okay, also, I want to say these are proven strategies. They are based on over 20 years of frontline fundraising experience, including some tough times when I was fundraising during the Great Recession, but still with my team managed to increase fundraising revenue, even in that time of crisis, 20% year over year for 4 consecutive years. So my friends, it is possible. I'm going to share some of the ways that you can do this too in our session today. And finally, I wanted to share my experience is actually a little bit unique because I have worked across organizations of absolutely every size. I've worked in small shops, medium shops, and very large shops. And I've also worked across different sectors, including arts, education, health, and human services. So these are road-tested ideas, and I know they work for organizations of all sizes and types. All right, so the goal of our time here together is to help you continue raising that consistent, reliable revenue that you need, even when you don't have face-to-face meetings available to you. So I want to know who here would consider themselves an action taker. I want you to light up my chat box again, type yes into that chat box if you're an action taker, because we're going to see later on in the session that taking action effectively and consistently is really one of the skills you need to master to become a truly successful major gift fundraiser. Even though we are action takers, it's so natural to feel like you're facing some really big challenges right now. I sure feel like it. So, right, we're in a time it's been really disorienting for a lot of us. The things that have worked for us for years as fundraisers are no longer working, or they're no longer available for us. I know we're in a time of great uncertainty right now. There is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but we're still not sure what's going to be happening in the upcoming year or two. So we're really in a situation with no precedent and no end in sight. I read something recently that said humans do not do uncertainty well. So it's a big challenge to feel like facing that uncertainty that we're facing right now. And chances are, if you're anything like me, you are really worried about what the future holds for us, for our families, for our communities, and for our organizations. So listen, big challenges that we're facing right now, and I think it's important to talk about them, right? So in addition to your challenges, I think if you're like a lot of fundraisers, you probably have a few desires when it comes to your fundraising as well. You want to find clarity on the way forward. How do we keep moving in the face of everything that we're facing right now? I know you want to be doing more of the right things to build your pipeline, the right things to build relationships, the right things to grow your revenue. So back in 2007, I was the head of fundraising at a shelter for women and children. And it was one of those winter nights, not like the bright day it is today. It was one of those winter nights when the sun sets really early. And I was just sitting in my office. I hadn't turned the lights on yet. So I was sitting there in the dark. And I just sat there feeling like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. I don't know if any of you have been there in your lives as fundraisers as well. Because like a lot of organizations, we were really dependent on special events and all the associated revenue that comes from that. Sponsorship, silent auction, very dependent on that income. And here's what I was noticing. Every phone call, every meeting, every letter, every email, it was the same news. I heard the same thing over and over again. I heard, I'm so sorry, we've had to cut back. It's not in the budget this year. We love you and we love your mission, but we've had to reallocate our spending. And while things are often clear in retrospect, what I didn't know then that we know now is that we were actually entering into the first weeks of the Great Recession. And by the end of that year, we, and we'd not be alone in this, would lose close to 50% of our fundraising revenue by the end of that year, of our largest source of fundraising revenue. We were determined to keep going. Our mission was too important to give up. And we did. And that's when I noticed something. When we were really working the phones, we were reaching out to those donors. It was a team effort. Everyone was pitching in. Here's what we noticed. It was our growing community of individual donors who were really stepping up to the plate. And this was happening despite tough times, right? They're facing challenges as well. I was noticing folks were digging deeper ever and ever, that they were giving from their hearts, they were moved, they were donating more than ever before. So by the time the year came to a close, it seemed like a bit of a miracle at that point. Our revenue from individual donors had actually increased enough to offset that 50% loss. It protected us from what could have been an absolutely deadly blow to our organization. I can't say I've ever been more relieved or more excited in my fundraising career. And I'm sharing this because it was such a crucial learning experience for me. I realized at that point, after that dark day at the start of the Great Recession, I realized that focusing on individual donors, doing the right thing with individual major donors, that was the path. It was the path to consistent, reliable revenue that we needed for our mission, and that this became even more important in a time of crisis and even more important during an economic downturn. So I wanted to share that with you because that is what today is all about. How do we keep raising more individual major gifts even during times of crisis? How do we keep raising more individual major gifts even when you don't have face-to-face meetings available to you? All right. I am going to get right in and dive into that content. I'm going to kick things off by talking about 3 major gift mistakes I see organizations making right now and how to fix those mistakes. I'm going to kick off with my favorite mistake, number 1, and it's something that I find so many organizations have yet to understand, and that is there is absolutely no such thing as a big or small donor. Now, you might be thinking, Emma, this is about major gifts. Of course, we want to talk about big donors, but here's the thing. This simply doesn't exist, okay? It's an arbitrary label we've created and we put this on our donors, right? It's a label we often indelibly apply after one single interaction with the organization. So don't get me wrong, I am definitely a fan of strategically segmenting your data, but it's just too often that we create these labels and we think of them as permanent and fixed. If your first gift to an organization was $50, you will be a $50 donor forever and ever from there on in, right? So I'm going to share with you a few practical examples, and we're going to do it in a fun way. We're going to play Who Wants to Play Big Donor or Small? And I won't sing for you here. I could do my Price is Right rendition, but I'm going to save you from that. I'm going to save you from my singing voice. And I am going to look at 3 different practical examples of different gifts that came into small and medium shops. and we'll see why there's no such thing as a small or big donor. This is just a handful of examples I want to say that I'm sharing with you. I've seen this countless times across organizations of all sizes during my 20-year fundraising career. So let's start with number one here. My chat box is kind of covering up. I'm just going to move that around. Okay, so let's look at donor number one. This donor, if we go by the usual playbook, it's a $75 donor. They had been giving $75 every year, like clockwork, for 10 years. But wait, this $75 donor, who was pretty well established, actually ultimately ended up making a gift of $250,000. Pretty big spread. This was not a bequest either. This was a gift in their lifetime. So $75 to $250,000, big donor or small? Okay, big. Oh, I love it. You're so into, go right in there. Let me know. I wish I could give you prizes. Maybe I'll do that for next time around. Okay, big donor or small? Here, big donor or small? Donor number two. This was a donor who actually started their journey with the organization with a $50 membership. Okay, so that $50 membership actually ended up turning into a $10,000 donation. What was even more incredible is, very sadly, this dedicated donor passed away and had included this organization in his will to the tune of a $7 million bequest. So big donor or small? $50 to $7 million. Big. There might be a different word for that. Mega. That might be a mega donor. All right, so here we go. Donor number three was someone who gave $500, and that's a very generous gift. That might be quite a large gift for your organization, but for a lot of organizations, $500 may still fly just under the radar, right? So this donor ultimately ended up going from giving $500 gift to giving a seven-figure gift, a $1 million gift. So, wow, big donor or small? And you notice here, there's some boxes that I haven't filled in. So let's fill in the blanks, because I'm guessing you're probably curious. I'm going to talk about what was the initial contact. What was the particular catalyst that led to that major gift? So donor number one is pretty simple. This donor, been giving $75 a year for 10 years, actually met the team at the organization, including board members, at an open house they were invited to as a longtime dedicated donor. Conversation started there, obviously did not end there. We'll be talking about that as well today. And that relationship led to that tremendous six-figure gift. All right, so $50 to $7 million here. How about this? Not a super glamorous connection. This person actually met the organization at the annual general meeting. So there you go. You can leverage all sorts of ways for folks to connect with your organization. Finally, $500 to $1 million. Picked up the phone. This was actually a phone call that was initiated by the organization. It wasn't a phone call to solicit, it was a phone call to thank. And that conversation led to an ongoing relationship that ultimately ended up with a gift of $1 million. So I see a few questions in the chat. I haven't mentioned this yet. We will actually, because there are quite a few of you here today, I promise I will stay on as long as I can. We're going to do a live Q&A at the end. So if you've asked me a question, I haven't answered it, I definitely will get to that at the end. And oftentimes I may actually answer your question as the session progresses as well. So you're going to notice these all had one thing in common. Each donor had an opportunity provided by the organization to begin a conversation. You'll also notice none of them are particularly glamorous, right? They're not fancy, they're not expensive, they're not exclusive. In fact, they're probably things that you're already doing in your organization. So I hope you had fun playing big donor or small with me. And I want to share with you practical ways to apply this and fix this problem in your organization. I think the big fix here is to stop applying labels based on simply one gift and start seeing the potential of every donor. If you're struggling to build your pipeline, this can be one of the most transformative steps to take. This might be a challenge. It's mentioned most often when I speak with fundraisers. We don't know where to find major donors. We don't feel like we have access to donors who have the capacity to make a major gift. But here's what we fail to see: the incredibly generous donors who are right there in front of us already, right? It's not that every donor is going to turn into a major donor, and that's okay, right? We can still love them. We can still value them. And what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I think the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to raise more money for your mission because you take such good care of your donors. So there we go. That was mistake number one. Second big mistake I see is to believe that your biggest barriers to major gift success are external. Here is my experience. The single biggest thing getting in the way of landing more major gifts, it's actually internal. It's often our own brains, and I include myself in that statement as well. It's our own mindsets that are getting in the way of major gift success. Now, I'm guessing your brain might actually be objecting to this statement right now. I know it's a tough pill to swallow, but I want you to hear me out. Here's a fact. Mother Nature has essentially designed us to be highly threat reactive, right? She wants us to be alarmed at 1,000 paper tigers so that we can avoid missing a single real tiger about to pounce. This has simply evolved as a protective mechanism over millions of years of evolution. Turns out we as humans are hardwired with what neuroscientists refer to as a negativity bias. Okay, so we more clearly remember, our brains more clearly remember and give weight to events and experiences that we perceive as negative, as opposed to those we perceive as positive. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that there aren't real threats out there right now. I recognize we're in the middle of a pandemic. Many of us are dealing with the unequal impacts of COVID. Many of us are dealing with huge threats like continued racist violence. So I'm not saying there are not real threats or real tigers out there now, but the key with negativity bias is to determine the difference between a very real threat that we need to take action on, the real tiger, to protect ourselves. We need to tell the difference between that and the perceived threat, or the paper tiger, that may be getting in the way of our taking action. Okay, because here is what is at stake at our organizations when we don't recognize how negativity bias impacts our decision-making about perceived threats. Our fundraising suffers, and more importantly, our mission suffers. This is a quote from a leading neuroscientist, Dr. Rick Hansen, and he says something I think that's really important for our sector. He's noticed negativity bias makes us overestimate threats, underestimate opportunities, and underestimate resources. So I see this impacting our fundraising every day, and I've seen this impacting our fundraising particularly profoundly since the beginning of the pandemic. So we need to be really careful and really aware about this, right? So this is something I want to, before I move on, I want to note, because I think it's really important. There's nothing wrong with you when you feel fear, right? It's just your brain doing its job. So fear, again, like the negativity bias, is to some degree hardwired into our brain. Everyone feels it, totally normal. Everyone feels it whether they admit it or not, right? In the context of fundraising, we often get scared of what we could imagine will happen. That's the paper tiger, especially as we push out of our comfort zone. And let's face it, major gifts are out of a lot of our comfort zones, right? So, but as we push out of our comfort zone, here is the challenge. We need to actually push out of our comfort zone in order to achieve growth and expand that comfort zone. So the reality is sometimes feeling certain kinds of fear is actually an important sign of growth, right? If you aren't feeling fear, maybe you aren't pushing outside of that comfort zone. So it's a good sign you're continuing to challenge yourself. And it's totally normal. We sometimes think like, we want to make it go away, but it's a very normal part of human life. It's also a very normal part of our fundraising process. So I want to talk about the fix for this, which is a little more complicated. I will readily admit that. It's a bit more complex, but here's a wonderful first step for you is to learn to recognize those paper tigers. Start looking out for paper tigers and start recognizing when negativity bias may be in play and be alert for when it kicks in. You know, recognize that your brain and also the brain of your board members, the brain of your boss, they're all continually looking for bad news, right? And as soon as it finds some, it'll fixate on it with tunnel vision and fast track it into memory storage. So being aware of this is absolutely super important to make sure it's not negatively impacting your major gift fundraising. Okay, mistake number 3 I've seen is that a lot of organizations and fundraisers think that face-to-face meetings are the only way. Now, face-to-face meetings, they are powerful, but they're also off the table right now. So we have to get creative. We have to use all the channels that are available to us to build meaningful relationships with our major donors. So a lot of us, especially those of us who have been around for a while, we've been taught face-to-face meetings are the only way to raise major gifts. So we're not maximizing all the tools available to us. I've noticed the nonprofit sector has been an especially late adopter of using video. We've been a late adopter of using video to connect with donors and build donor relationships. I believe that's because a lot of organizations and fundraisers are making assumptions about their donors, and they may be experiencing a bit of negativity bias here. They're thinking things like our donors are too old to learn the new tech, or everyone's experiencing Zoom fatigue right now. Donors aren't interested in another video meeting, but these assumptions simply aren't true. We're almost a year into this. We've got almost a year of experience under our belt right now, and successful organizations are making virtual relationship building work. I have seen it, and I'm going to share some of those secrets today. So I'm going to dive deep into how to get more effective at landing and leading virtual meetings in just a second. But first, guess what, my friends? You guessed right. It's time for you to weigh in. If you identify with any of these mistakes, I want to guarantee you, you're absolutely not alone. So if you see these organizations making any of these mistakes, I want you to type it into the comments. 1, if you're falling into the big or small trap. 2, if you're seeing all barriers to growth as external. 3, if your organization thinks face-to-face meetings are the only way. So type it in. I see some of all of the aboves. Okay, 2, 3, I see many all of the aboves. Oh yes, okay. Many of you are identifying with 1, 2, and 3. I love this. I'm not even seeing any patterns. It's very much all over the place. 1 and 2, yep, guilty of all. I'm seeing a lot of 1 and 2s, some 3s here. Okay, you're identifying this strongly, so know that you're not alone. Everyone on this call today is weighing in to say, like, these are very familiar to us, right? So, you know, it's good, but the biggest thing you can do to progress oftentimes is noticing and naming these mistakes, and then you really have the opportunity to change things. All right, so talk about 6 steps to landing and leading effective virtual meetings. Okay. We do have to face it. I think no matter what happens this year, virtual donor meetings are actually going to be here to stay. And you're not alone for sure in struggling with the passing, I'll say temporary passing of face-to-face meetings, because nothing, absolutely nothing can compare with connecting in person with donors when it comes to building strong relationships. One of the reasons I specialize in major gifts is because I just absolutely thrived with that one-to-one face-to-face relationship building. So it's really tough when that gets taken away from us, but things have changed. Chances are you're going to have to continue working with donors remotely via phone calls and video meetings for the foreseeable future. But the good news is I'm actually hearing from frontline fundraisers, it's easier than ever to reach donors right now, which makes sense. Depending on where you are, donors aren't on their usual travel schedules. They're at home more often. They're picking up the phone more often. They're probably more willing to have a conversation about a cause they care about, right? But if you are going to land a donor meeting, you need to do this right. So there are 6 must-haves you're going to have in place in order to land and lead a successful virtual donor meeting. Okay, number 1, I want you to think about making it easy to say yes, right? So we know already face-to-face meetings, they're the gold standard in terms of working with your major donors. But you know, when you think about it, it's actually a really, really big commitment for a donor to make. It's a big time commitment. It's a big relationship commitment. So it's a big leap for a lot of folks. So I'm seeing this as a bit of a silver lining to having to make these shifts right now to more virtual. While we don't have face-to-face meetings available to us, it makes it a lot easier to offer up something a little different, a little new, maybe a virtual coffee or a 15 or 20-minute phone call. It just makes sense to book something like this with a donor right now, right? And you have a little bit more room to experiment than you may have previously. Let's face it, I talked about major gifts being a little stuffy and old-fashioned earlier, but now we've actually been pushed into a place where we have to experiment to keep our fundraising going, right? So we've got room to experiment and test what works with donors. So key here is to give your donors a choice. You simply won't find out if they prefer phone or video or want a video call or don't want a video call unless you ask. Don't make assumptions. Go ahead and ask what works well for the donor. And I've got my very favorite make it easy tip for you. The company Boomerang analyzed 40 million emails. They determined your email is most likely to get a response if it's between 50 and 120 words. Who writes like 9 times more than that? Guilty as charged right here. So it should work really hard to be disciplined to keep it short and sweet. So here's the nice thing about this though. Makes it easier for you, makes it easier for your donor, makes it more likely for you to get a response. Keep it short and sweet. Offer your donor some options and make it easy for them to say yes to connecting with you. Okay, mistake number 2, I see this pretty often. That is, organizations sometimes make it all about the donor, right? I see even the most seasoned fundraising professionals still make it about the organization, right? You know, you'll read some communications and it's sort of like me, or we, right? So they talk a lot about the organization's achievements, programs, goals in sort of possessive terms, right? But we all are familiar with that old adage, ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice. So time to shift our approach here. Now, I had actually shared this on another presentation and someone said, that's fundraising 101. And I said, it may be fundraising 101, but let me tell you, in my travels, I have noticed that very few people are actually implementing this idea of making it about the donor effectively. So here's the thing you need to do. You need to ask your donor. You can ask them for impressions, thoughts, feedback. You can run an idea by them. You need to get curious with your donor, okay? In my opinion, curiosity is actually the top soft skills that effective fundraisers need to develop. It's even more important if you're a major gift fundraiser. So you need to make it all about the donor, engage the donor, and really start asking them for things instead of giving them that flow of information about all the organization's achievements and accomplishments and programs, right? There can be space for that, but let's start off our relationships by really engaging that donor, making it all about them. Mistake number 3 I see, and that is giving up too soon. So you really need to be persistent, right? Most fundraisers do give up far too soon. I'm going to borrow a statistic from sales because, unpopular opinion, right here, we are all in sales, my friend. Maybe that is a whole other webinar, but here's what we know from sales. It takes 6 to 8 touch points and meaningful touch points before you can qualify a lead. And most people give up after 3 or 4, okay? So most people are giving up far too soon. The key is to be what I call politely persistent, right? You want to continue providing value in all your touch points. You want to continue staying focused on the donor, making sure you're staying focused on their needs. Keep trying, mix up your channels, experiment with different approaches that will get your donor's attention. But above all, don't give up, and don't be in the majority of people who give up after 3 to 4 efforts. Okay, so be persistent. All of the most effective major gift fundraisers are politely persistent. All right. Here is tip number 4, is to be prepared. You want to prepare with a meeting plan. I actually write a plan for every meeting that I have with a major donor. Because once you land that meeting, it's absolutely crucial. You want to be planning ahead. You want to clarify with yourself exactly why are you meeting with the donor? What are your goals here? What do you want to achieve with your time together? So working with yourself to create a plan is absolutely crucial. And I think it's even more important we do this right now, because we're all a little bit out of our element, right? I don't know if I'm alone in that, but all a little bit out of our element. It can take time to get used to doing something new, right? Especially taking your donor meeting virtual. So if you want to be more effective in your major donor meetings, nothing can be more helpful than sitting down and mapping out a plan for yourself. So this is actually, I know this is a big need, because this is actually one of my most popular resources that I provide to my students. It's my donor meeting plan template, and it walks you through every element you need to think about when you're preparing for a super effective major donor meeting. So I know what some of you are thinking right now. It feels a little disingenuous or artificial to write out a plan before I meet with my donor. I'm all about relationships, you know, I like to let things unfold organically, but I want you to think about it this way, right? What could be more thoughtful than actually preparing and using the donor's time wisely and making sure that you're being more purposeful in better understanding their values, their needs, and their interests, right? So if that feels at all artificial for you, I want you to flip it around and reframe it a little bit, because creating a meeting plan for all of your donor interactions can be a game changer for your donor meetings. Okay, number 5, my tip for you is to ask great questions. In fact, speaking of questions, this is one of the top questions I hear from clients who are new to major gifts. It's like, okay, I'm having a donor meeting, but what specifically am I talking about? Especially if I'm not going to be giving them a one-way flow of all of my organization's programs and achievements, right? So first and foremost, you're really aiming to have a meaningful conversation, right? In fact, you're doing way more listening than talking. You're asking great questions. You're helping uncover the donor's values, the donor's interests, their hopes and their fears that motivate their philanthropy. Okay, here's what I like to do as a part of my donor meeting planning. I actually make a list. I make myself a list, 5 or 6 strategic questions that you could ask that donor to help move you closer to your goals for your meeting. So be purposeful, be strategic. My tip for you around questions is really think about them in advance and aim to ask open-ended questions that really prompt some thought, right? You want to draw on the knowledge and the feelings, this is about emotion, of the donor, as opposed to asking a close-ended question that, you know, you're going to get a one-word yes or no answer. This takes a bit of practice, which is why I like to pre-plan this. And of course, I want to assure you, this is an organic conversation with your donor, right? You're not grilling them. You don't need to worry. You can weave in some, all, or none of your questions. Inevitably, you do. Even if you do make a donor meeting plan, you flow a little bit, right? You adjust your approach based on how engaged and forthcoming the donor seems during your meeting. So think about those questions. In fact, I like to start, you know, gathering good questions when I see and hear them out in the world, even if they're just great interview questions. If you ever watch a great interviewer like Oprah, you know, she asks great questions. So keep a list of questions you think that are really interesting and profound. You might like to incorporate into your donor meetings. All right. My tip number 6 for you is leveraging the power of video. Okay, so a lot of fundraisers have shared with me that their leadership is actually holding them back from using video meetings. What I'm hearing the big concern is that they think it's going to look unprofessional. I hope that we've moved past that at this point, because I know what we've been seeing over the past year is we've been hearing from fundraisers that donors are actually it's actually strengthening our relationships with donors to some degree for them to understand, like, we're human, right? Sometimes we're having these donor meetings. If you've got kids at home, you're gonna have a special guest appearance, you have a special pet guest appearance. And actually for most donors, they understand this, right? They're human too. And they understand that we're in a tricky situation right now. And this, in fact, vulnerability can help strengthen our relationships. So it's okay to be human. It's okay to, not be perfect. Could do a whole other webinar just on the problem of perfectionism in major gift fundraising. But donors are human and you're human, and it's okay for you to have a slightly imperfect Zoom call with your donors, right? However, with that said, it's not difficult to up your game a little bit. I'm going to share with you my absolute favorite tip for you to up your game and increase your connection with your donors when you do have video meetings. So my number one favorite tip, it's also the most counterintuitive tip and the most difficult to master, and that is helping donors get that sense of connection with you, get that sense of eye contact by looking into the lens. This takes a lot of practice, my friends. I'm doing it right now. You probably notice I've been doing it quite a bit. Hopefully I'm on camera for you. I know Zoom's always a bit wacky that way, but looking into the lens actually gives the donor an experience of having eye contact with you, right? So it is so important, the eye contact, to build a sense of trust and connection with your donor, something we have to work extra hard at when we are on video and we are one-dimensional as opposed to being in front of our donors in our full human form, right? So I want you to experiment with this one because it does take practice. Next time you're on a video call with colleagues or with friends, give this a try and get someone to do it for you too. Go ahead, practice looking into the lens, and then let's say look at a picture on the screen, look at someone's face. You feel like you're making a connection, but the experience of the viewer is actually disconnection. I'm doing it right now, I'm not looking at you. So really want to recommend this to you, and it's something that not a lot of folks that have mastered that has a massive impact on your video meetings. So I know actually here, I was going to say, I actually don't need to look at the chat to know what your questions are going to be, because I always get the same question here, is folks find it very difficult to balance this, right? Which I get. But, think of it as when you're in person and meeting with your donors, like you wouldn't, if you're in person, make unrelenting 100% unblinking eye contact with them the whole time you're meeting, right? It's not natural. So folks always want to know, how can I look into the lens during video meetings with donors? Because I need to look at the donor on the screen. I need to see how they're reacting. It's very difficult to do that when I'm looking into the lens. So I want you to think of it like this. It's kind of like eye contact you would make in an in-person meeting, and that you wouldn't make that unbroken eye contact, because it would absolutely unnerve the donor if you were just staring into their eyes 100% of the time. Here's what makes eye contact feel a little more natural. Everyone's different, lots of personal difference, cultural differences here, but it's good to, optimal eye contact, while it can vary, start at the general starting point of thinking like 50-70, right? It's called the 50-70 rule. Aim to maintain eye contact maybe 50% of the time while you're speaking, and about 70% of the time when you're listening, right? And you again can gauge the response and gauge the comfort level of the donor. But that's a good goal. So I guess I wanted to share that to say, like, you're not expected to make unrelenting eye contact for the whole time you're on a meeting, but do be more mindful about looking into that lens. Makes a huge difference, makes a huge difference. So I want you to experiment with that, and I'm going to go ahead and guess what? Ask you to rate yourself again. How well are you doing right now in your organization with landing and leading virtual donor meetings? So let's keep going, because the clock is ticking and we still have some important things to cover, okay? And actually the next thing I'm covering is probably my favorite thing I want to share with you. It's the Major Gift Success Framework. Okay, so there are 3 things that I have found that set the most successful major gift fundraisers apart from the rest. And I think they might actually be a bit surprising to you. It might not be what you think, but I think they're principles that absolutely every fundraiser can put to use to improve their results. So even if you aren't a major gift specialist, I think there are important things you can take away here. Okay, First success factor is focus. And this is super important right now, because here's what I'm hearing from fundraisers. I'm hearing you're overwhelmed, right? You're being pulled in so many different directions. You're wearing so many different hats. And this is just exacerbated in the past year with the pandemic. However, the most successful fundraisers are really focused on high priority activities, the high value activities, even when those activities push you out of your comfort zone. Now, I want to share, I know that this is a challenge for sure right now, especially many of you are working at home with small children. You're juggling so much, you're juggling work and you're juggling homeschool and you're juggling childcare. So I wanted to share with you something I recently shared with my students about how even small pockets of focus time can add up to have a massive, massive impact. So if you can spend just 10 minutes a day, let's say, can you dedicate yourself to spending just 10 minutes a day to something, your highest priority in major gifts? Or let's even use a personal self-care thing. Let's say you want to read a bit more. Let's dedicate 10 minutes a day to reading more. I think most people can find that somewhere in their schedule. Over the course of a week, that'll add up to a whole hour, right? I'm probably not alone in thinking like, I probably can't find a whole hour in one day to just lie down and read. It sounds heavenly. So if you think 10 minutes a day adds up to 1 hour a week, you add that up over the course of a month, you could read for a half day. That's 4 hours, right? 10 minutes a day turns into 4 hours a month. And this is powerful stuff. If you add this up, 10 minutes a day of focus time on whatever your priority is, over the course of a year, it adds up to the equivalent of 1 full work week, right? Pretty impressive stuff. So I wanted to share this with you, largely because if you're struggling to find focus right now, even really small pockets of time can have huge impact when you add them up over time. So I want to encourage you, don't give up if you're stretched really thin right now and you can carve out that little pocket of time. You can make progress. You can make progress if you're able to even find a small pocket of focus time. Okay, next success factor is having a plan. The best fundraisers, they don't leave their relationship building to chance. They have a clear month-by-month plan on how they're engaging their top donors. They also take time to plan their week as much as they can. They block out time as much as they can, even if it's just an hour or two a week, to take action on their biggest fundraising priorities. All right, so when you get focus and you add in a plan, that gives you clarity, right? Having clarity on your way forward is such an important part. And it also can help address sometimes that fear, overwhelm, and uncertainty that so many of us are feeling right now. And many of us are feeling in general about major gifts. Okay. Then our third point we have is action. And none of what you've learned today is going to make a difference unless you can take action on it, right? So even committing to one small manageable action can help. And guess what you get when you have a plan that you start taking action on? It's something a lot of fundraisers really want. It's confidence. You start building confidence. This has been one of the biggest learnings in my career, as well as one of my biggest learnings in working with a lot of coaching and consulting clients. There's no shortcut to confidence building. I wish you could take a pill. It would be great. It's only through taking action that your confidence and your comfort level can actually grow. Okay, so finally, to wrap this all up together, when you're focusing on the right things, you're taking consistent action on growing your major gifts, that's when you get results. So it's pretty simple, right? It's pretty simple, but like so many things, simple is not the same thing as easy, right? So I'm going to recap for you here. When you're focusing on the right things and you have a plan to execute, that's when you get clarity. Taking action on your plan is how you build confidence. When you take consistent action on that plan, even if it's in small pockets of time, and you do it in your right area of focus, that's when you get results. I missed confidence in there somewhere, but confidence is in there too, right? Does that make sense to everybody how I laid that out there? I hope. Confidence is key. I'm hearing a lot of this. I'm hearing a lot. Confidence is so huge, and there's no shortcut to building confidence, right? All right, I'm seeing lots of yes. I hope you enjoyed that. And one of the reasons I like to share that is because I want to make it clear Major gift success has absolutely nothing to do with your access to people with deep pockets. I hope that that's been a takeaway for you today, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, look back at everything we've covered so far. Okay, we talked about 3 common major gift mistakes and how to fix them. We looked at 6 steps to landing and leading virtual donor meetings. And we also looked at a simple framework anyone can use for major gift success. So this leads us to an obvious question, something I asked you earlier, and that is, how do you implement the ideas you learned today and not let this just be another session you attended? So I want to ask you here, who has resonated with the content that I've shared today? And I want to hear, what's the most valuable thing you're taking away from our time together? And go ahead and type that into the chat box for me. Okay, resonated very much. There is no big or small donor. I love that you took that away. Planning and blocking out your priorities. 6 steps were very valuable. Very good 6 steps. Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed this. I'm so happy to hear this. Major gift success framework is awesome. I mentioned at the start, I wanted to pack as much value as I could into our time today, but I also know there is a ton more to your journey in major gifts, including the implementation, the accountability, and the mastery of it. Next up, I'd like to share with you is Major Gift Master Plan. It's a comprehensive online program where I teach the effective implementation of a plan to raise more 5, 6, and even 7-figure gifts. So what we're going to do together in this program is learn about the high-level strategies, right? Looking at the high-level strategies behind successful major gift fundraising. But even more importantly, you'll have it all broken down into a step-by-step execution guide that leaves nothing out and takes nothing for granted. See, I'll be wrapping it all up. I'll be showing you the systems that you need to continue to maintain and implement so that you can keep everything in the program going, right? I'll also be sharing in this session the key performance indicator system that I use at every stage of moves management with my clients, from identifying to stewarding your donors. I also want to make sure you feel really comfortable joining the program. So I'm giving you a 90-day guarantee. Essentially, if you do the work and go through the program with me, and you don't feel like you've received value by the end, I will give you your money back. All right, I'm gonna do a quick review for you. I wanna share everything you're gonna get in the program today. You get the program itself, the system, Major Gift Master Plan. That's a $1,997 value. You get my advanced time management system. That's a $297 value. We get our private Facebook community, such an important part of the program. That's a $997 value. You get live access to me weekly, including coaching and a Q&A. And finally, if you sign up within the first 10 folks who join us, you're going to get your fast action bonus coaching call that's worth $397. So total value here is $4,485, and the lifetime access to the program is $997. Here's where you can go right now, majorgiftmasterplan.com. You can go there to enroll. I'm going to open up our Q&A now. If you're still with us, I am hanging out with you as long as it takes to get our questions answered. I would like some examples on what to ask for donor feedback on. I have tried that method, but not been successful. This can be super simple, right? Some people say, you know, here's a super simple example of what I teach is one really great and practical engagement technique is actually to start running a really draft version of your case for support by your donors, right? It's going to be a great engagement technique. It can be really important if you don't already have a case. And it is super useful for you as an organization to get donor feedback on what people think about your case. Is it compelling? Is it motivating? Should you be focusing on that, right? You can ask just about anything. You can ask anything. You could have an idea. You could say, this is the direction we're thinking about heading into. You know, I wanted to chat with folks who are closest with us just to get your thoughts and your feedback. Like when I say this, what are your impressions of this, right? Does this sound like we're headed in the right direction? Is this a priority for you as a donor? So be creative. I think sometimes people overthink this. So they think I have to have a big thing to take to donors. I have to have a big strategic plan. Trouble is sometimes by the time we're sharing our strategic plan with our donors, it's so done and our donors know it's glossy designed and we're like, what do you think? And they're like, come on, we know this is not something, you know, that's going to change when I give feedback on it. So just think about that, like truly, what can you run by a donor and get their impression on, right? So, and don't overthink it and don't think it has to be a big thing or a giant thing or a glossy thing. I hope that helps. All right, one of my fears, challenges that stops me from asking for a meeting is that donors know you're asking because you want to make an ask. How do you actually, okay, so here's actually my solution for that is, you know, one thing I often will say, I'll often be really direct. If I'm not making an ask, I'll say, I don't want, this meeting is not because I want to ask for money, right? Like you can be quite straightforward. This is not a meeting to ask for money. This is a meeting because I want to get your feedback on this really important thing. So don't be shy to say that, right? Thanks to you all for coming. I know how busy you are and I know how valuable your time is. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate you. I appreciate the hard work that you're doing during these difficult times, right? This is not an easy time to fundraise and you are still out there. You're on the front lines and you're doing really important work.